Now, first of all, this is the very first time that Save the Children compiled and released such a report. What are the considerations behind this move?
First of all, thanks for having me back on the show. It's always a pleasure to be here. What we have done today in Save the Children is to commemorate the Day of the Child that we are all celebrating internationally. We have done this report where we have identified 8 so-called child enders, 8 incidents that can happen in children's lives that will forever end their childhood. And we all know, we all want our children to have a complete childhood where they get access to education, where they get the right nutrition, where they don't get diseases they die from before they are 5, where they are protected and don't experience extreme violence, where they don't have to work. And all these indicators have we put together in an index covering 172 countries across the world. And we have simply ranked all these 172 countries according how long or how short the children's childhood is in each of these countries. And it shows, which is a devastating figure, that 1 in 4 children have their childhood stolen by 1 or more of these childhood enders. This is actually 700 million children we are talking about here, and we need to change that.
What are some of the most important factors? You mentioned 8 factors that are really ending or primarily ending childhood for children. What are them and how important are they?
Well, it depends what country you're in, of course, but one thing that has actually brought China up high in the index, China is number 41 in the index out of 172 countries, puts China in the first quarter of this index, just behind countries like the United States and other countries. So one of the things that had changed China's rating on this of these 172 countries is that China has been very good at ending childhood mortality. Actually really working very, very hard to end preventable death for children under 5. Of course, China is also a country where we don't see a lot of teenage pregnancies. We don't see a lot of children being married. So that brings China up. But also what we're seeing ending at childhood is, of course, war and conflict, extreme violence that we experience in many, many countries. But the good news about this report is that each country can look at the report and ask themselves, what should we be doing to make sure that we can go higher on this index next year? And one of the things that China can do is to look more at the disabled children. There's still a need for disabled children to have better access to education in China. And of course, I'm hoping that China will look at that over the next year.
What are some of the factors that took you by surprise? I mean, looking at the results of the report, for instance, when I hear what you just say about China, I think you know, we here in China are pretty proud of the fact that we are able to really lift the livelihood of many children out of poverty in a very relatively short period of time. But you just mentioned that really China is just slightly behind the United States. How come the United States is not doing so well in this regard?
Well, this is a mixture of factors that some countries are not doing well. I'm here in South Africa now, where we should think, well, South Africa should be very high on this index. But unfortunately, in South Africa, they have a very high rate of child homicide, children being murdered either in their own families or in gang violence. So these are the kind of factors that can change. And I think for the case of the United States, it's a mixture of, there's still poverty in the United States, there's still child mortality, and there's of course still teenage pregnancy in the United States. So it's always a mixture of different factors. But I do think, talking about China, that China should be proud of where they are on this index. Of course, if we look at the Asian nations, the development nations in Asia, China is outranking all the developing nations in Asia, and I think China should be proud of that. But the index is made, so even though you're proud proud of where you are on this index. There's still more to be done. And the thing we are putting a light on for China is perhaps we should look more at how we get access for disabled children into education with other children. I think that is what could really lift China enormously over the coming years.
Of course, reporting on the problem, on the issue is one thing, and to find the solution is another. So looking at the overall state of children in this world at this moment, what would be some of the most urgent measures you will be calling on governments to pay attention and, you know, to start correcting so that children's livelihood can be given back to them?
I think the first and foremost, we have to look at ending child death under the age of 5. We have 6 million children that never actually get to live to their 5th birthday. And the worst thing about that is that they die from diseases that we could have prevented. We know the cure, we know what we have to do, and that we just simply can't look into the eyes of these children and accept that we lose 6 million children before they reach their 5th birthday, when we could have prevented it. The other thing, of course, that ends a childhood abruptly if children don't get access to education. And that is why the whole world should really focus on access to quality education. Because if a child gets education, she's much more likely not to marry when she's a teenager, much more likely not to be pregnant, of course, as a teenager. And the best news is she's much more likely, when she has her children, to bring them up to also access education and live healthier lives. That is why ending childhood mortality, education, and of course the third thing, protecting children from violence are so extremely important. And those are the 3 things that Save the Children, for example, are working to achieve worldwide.
Well, it sounds simple to say that, but basically you're touching the public health sector, you're touching the education sector, and sometimes these are the sectors that are really hardest hit when the economy is not doing very well. And basically from what you just said, what we can tell is basically the state of the children is the real indicator of the development level of a society, right? So it's really a coordinated effort, and maybe that's where the challenge is.
Absolutely, it is a coordinated effort, but we are also seeing progress, and it's always important for me to remind everyone that children are actually better off now than they were 20 and 30 years ago. Just in Africa, where I'm sitting now, we have managed, or the African nations have managed to halve child mortality under 5 in a space of 30 years. I mean, China, where I've been so many times, I was there a few months back, China has also managed to lift millions after millions of children out of poverty, bringing them into education. And one of the reasons why China, for example, comes so high on the index is because you in China have done very well in ending childhood mortality. What does this show us? That actually shows that even though you are a developing nation, you can still do a lot. It takes a very concerted, focused effort to get there. But I think the good news about this report is that we also have some positive surprises that are good to take note of. And also, these are man-made issues. It is man-made that children do not have access to education, or that children get married off too early, or that they die from preventable diseases. And if something is man-made, together we can also